SpeKular smart grid technology created for independent electric grids building, independent power supply to loads, for public grid microcuts coverage, and public grid outages. SpeKular TRON presentation. Let's start by identifying the components in the system. The components in a primary smart grid system based on renewable energy can be found in the pointed area. In addition, other components are shown non-based on renewable energy instead, that interoperate with and are integrated in the primary smart grid system, such as the public grid or a generator. SpeKular TRON is the core of the system. It integrates all the components by interoperating with all of them, resulting in an only operating system. SpeKular TRON is the system intelligence and the one that builds the grids. The battery is the second most important component, a lithium-ion one here. It brings flexibility to the system operation, enabling all the energy supply components integration and making it possible to manage the unpredictable and intermittent renewable source when supplying power. From a technical point of view, it is essential for SpeKular TRON to build grids. All the systems include several in-parallel high-voltage units, so as the system manages actively the different units balance, thus improving the battery performance while ensuring the supply security. The renewable source is the third component, photovoltaics here, that ideally might be combined with eolic sources. It is responsible for the free energy supply to the system. It works on grid, connected to the alternating grid built by SpeKular TRON, and faces the loads directly. Both setups are possible, exporting power to the grid or preventing this export physically. Last, auxiliary backup sources, such as the public grid or a generator, can supply energy directly to the loads or operate solely as battery backups, depending on the type of operation mode set up. They may be used individually or altogether if necessary. Their use will depend on different criteria such as cost, power grid availability, or use consumption from public grid constraints. General operation. Note that SpeKular TRON has been conceived and designed to operate as a system independent of the public grid, building its own grid or smart grid. The very purpose of this operation mode is to limit or completely eliminate the need of public electric grid use, while fixing all the issues related to it, such as microcuts or outages, in a way that the continuity and reliability of the energy supply can be guaranteed to protect the consumer equipment integrity. As a reminder, SpeKular TRON can be integrated in any building covering the 100% or the load supply consumptions, or covering a specific percentage of it where the most sensitive and critical devices are connected to. SpeKular TRON, while operating, works in a standalone way, off-grid, as a continuous UPS, uninterruptible power supply, with an efficiency beyond 97% for all the inner conversion processes. This way, SpeKular TRON builds its own electric supply grid and does not interoperate with the public electric grid, searching for the balance and the coordination of both the renewable source and the battery to maintain the supply in a continuous way. By not interoperating with the public electric grid, in case any grid cut or outage, micro or major, occurs, the consumption will not be concerned, as it is completely supplied by SpeKular TRON through its own grid built. In case an energy shortage occurs in SpeKular TRON system due to a misbalance between the renewable source and the loads, that is, low renewable supply or overconsumption, SpeKular TRON will couple to the auxiliary non-renewable backup sources, electric public grid or generator, using them as a backup for the battery and the consumptions. Although it will keep being the grid built by SpeKular TRON the one that supplies the loads, so as the consumption will not be affected by any failure in the backup sources either. SpeKular TRON will decide the auxiliary non-renewable backup sources used based on different criteria. First, the grid energy cost versus the one of diesel. Second, the power availability of each of the auxiliary sources compared with the one required at that very moment. And last, whatever the constraints in the use of any of these two auxiliary sources are, either there is an administrative or legal maximum public grid usage threshold, or diesel supply is not available while public grid is. It is also possible that a non-planned power excess in the consumption happens, a common and unpredictable issue when there is a big amount of working equipment at the same time. If SpeKular TRON detects that this excess power consumption is compromising the integrity of the battery by demanding more power from the battery than the design power, SpeKular TRON will activate one of the backup sources to relieve the power supplied by the battery until the power consumption normalizes. As above, it is the grid built by SpeKular TRON, the one that supplies the loads, and it is SpeKular TRON, the one to manage and coordinate the power supply distribution from the battery and/or the auxiliary backup source. As already stated, the auxiliary backup source used will depend on the already mentioned criteria. SpeKular TRON is able to operate simultaneously with both auxiliary backup sources if needed in a specific project. Summarizing, SpeKular TRON has been designed to stay always in UPS operation mode, so as maintaining permanently the supply thanks to the coordinated management of the renewable source, the auxiliary backup sources, and the battery. Nevertheless, if during any day slot the renewable source is not available, and it is not mandatory to have an unstoppable supply at that time, from a rational use of the energy perspective, it is more interesting to get SpeKular TRON programmed to start a passive hibernation mode operation during those non-renewable hours. This way, SpeKular TRON switches off completely, and only its intelligence core stays active. In this operation mode, the own SpeKular TRON consumption is minimum, putting thus the maximum energy in the battery aside in case any critical situation happens. The consumption is then directly connected to one of the auxiliary backup sources, usually the public electric grid, and SpeKular TRON stays in monitoring status just in case a grid outage or failure occurs. In this case, SpeKular TRON self-activates and takes the place of the power supply to the loads until the grid failure is fixed, when it returns the management to the grid supply to keep on staying in passive hibernation mode, monitoring any other new grid failure. In this passive hibernation mode, SpeKular TRON auto-activation process takes up to 15 seconds. If a quicker auto-activation answer was needed, on the order of a millisecond, SpeKular TRON can be programmed to be in active hibernation mode, which significantly increases SpeKular TRON self-consumption during hibernation mode, but that much as if it was in UPS mode. As you can see, it is mandatory to find the perfect balance between energy and functionality, and SpeKular TRON provides with all the solutions. Como vemos, se requiere encontrar el equilibrio entre energía y funcionalidad, y SpeKular TRON le ofrece todas las posibilidades. When SpeKular TRON is set up to stay in hibernation mode, it will operate in pre-charge mode before starting UPS mode. During pre-charge mode, SpeKular TRON prepares the battery with the renewable source building the grid, but operating in a standalone way, isolated from the consumptions, to only supply renewable energy to the battery. Once the planned starting time for UPS mode arrives, SpeKular TRON will connect to the loads starting its operation and will stay in that UPS operation mode during all the time slot, as programmed.